I call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I follow on from my colleague from Nelson, who rightfully points to the reality of there being issues in and around New Zealand. I don't think anyone would deny that. But it is a bizarre piece of legislation that is attempting to kill what is part of the culture of New Zealand. In fact, I was just in at Copperfields, just grabbing my coffee from a young man in there called Robin. I said I'd quote him because I said, I'm going back in to speak on a bill. He said, what's the bill? And I said, it's a Freedom Camping Bill. He said, what does that do? And I said, well, it effectively stops you going and camping wherever they want to put up a sign. And he says, quote, well, isn't that the fun of New Zealand? And in fact, that's exactly right. That freedom that we have had, that people came from the UK, from Ireland, from all around the world to New Zealand to enjoy, the ability to go into the outdoors, not owned or controlled by anyone, and to enjoy nature is something that goes right to the heart of what is Kiwi culture. And this piece of legislation, look at this. This bill here, this nanny state piece of legislation is going to stop that. Well, I've got one supplementary order paper here from my colleague, Phil Twyford, and that's at the heart of it. That's at the heart of it, because what it says, and that's what we will support, it says it doesn't determine what you should do, that is, it doesn't outlaw freedom camping, but it says if you are to deposit waste or interfere with or damage, then you're liable for prosecution. In fact, it's the kind of RMA approach, really. It's that it doesn't specify exactly what we should do, and let it be noted that the parties in this House that are telling us what we should do, where we should poo, what we should do, national and act. And I hate to think of the number of times I've been in this House and I have heard rantings and ravings from members on that side and from Rodney Hyde in particular about compliance costs, about nanny state, about telling us as Kiwis what we should do. And they, do you know what they're doing? They're telling us where we can poo. They're telling us where we can poo. Well, I've always been told that not in the cities, but in the greater outdoors, if you do get caught short, if you do have to exercise your natural feelings, then take a shovel. Take a shovel. And that usually addresses it. And I have to say, that's not telling you what you should or shouldn't do or where you should or shouldn't do it. It's saying minimise and reduce the impacts of that. RMA, bottom line, effects-based legislation. Why would you come and bring into this House, well, I'll tell you why, a shallow bit of politicking by Nick Smith, a shallow bit, coming back to the legislation, this is a shallow bit of politicking by Nick Smith, and he's convinced his colleagues, and I know the Minister in the Chair is quite embarrassed by it, because I believe she is truly committed to conservation and the outdoors and encouraging people to get out. And she knows that this bill is going to kill that, because people will be paranoid about where they're going to poo. and that, quite frankly, is just bizarre. In a country of 4 million people, and we have a number of visitors accepted, but we bring them into this country almost under false pretences. If everywhere they go, they're going to face signs put up by councils that could effectively have a blanket ban, it's up to them. Have to say the councils find this whole proposition is rather bizarre, because while they want to do something to reduce the impacts, firstly, the government doesn't help with any infrastructural costs. We did. Sewage, water, our subsidy scheme helped councils that didn't have the resources but were facing quite a lot of visitors, Kaikoura in particular, many others around the country, that they needed to put in place proper infrastructure. If there are no toilets, it's very hard for people to go to the toilet, I have to say. So you do need to build infrastructure, Mr. Chairman, you need to build infrastructure to address the problem, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman.
I call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you. As we have gone out and promoted New Zealand, and as we have encouraged more people into this country, then the basic responsibility is to put in place better infrastructure. The Labor government had assistance for councils. The national government gave $14 billion in tax cuts to its mates, the rich, then said we have no money to do anything else, and so has chopped schemes like that, and now councils have the difficult option of saying, well, we can't afford to put in place proper toilets, we do want to attract visitors, we do realise there's an impact, and so what Nick Smith in his shallow way said, well, I'll give you a tool, here you are, you can go and put up little signs and tell people they're not allowed to come here. Well, that goes to the heart of Kiwi culture. It goes to the heart of the experience that we sell and promote overseas, I have to say. The images, if you look around from Tourism New Zealand, are from wide open spaces for people to have freedom to go out and enjoy it. Most of those people understand that they have to minimise the impact on the environment. The problem is often, if they're in a camper van, even if it is self-contained, at the end of their journey or the tank is full, there's simply not enough dump stations. And the real impact out around the country is where camper vans, self-contained camper vans, dump large volumes of effluent in one place. It is outrageous, it is shocking, and there should be, as the SOP from my good colleague Phil Twyford says, there should be some penalty for that. But you've got to say, if we don't provide the facilities, Mr Chairman, then I have to say it's very hard to impose a fine. There'll be backlash, there's no doubt about that. If people go away from New Zealand, and we've got a supplementary order paper from the Minister to tidy up how they can charge these people for these penalties. So if they run offshore, because most of them are visitors, they come here for a time, they hop on the plane, they move off, and then all of a sudden there's a penalty imposed upon them. So there's a very complex set of rules and regulations in the legislation to ensure that we can get the money out of them, that they can be charged. Or if in fact they're let off for some technical reason, then the obligation is on the rental campervan companies to refund the money. Pardon me. Well, all this complex piece of legislation, the complex rules here, are unnecessary. What we've got to do is put out a code of practice, put in place some proper infrastructure, put some signs up that encourage the right culture and behaviour, and say no toileting for the next 50 kilometres, for example. Clearly an indication that it is not acceptable to go to the toilet on the side of the road. Not say don't camp and have some overzealous, and dare I say it, maybe farmer-controlled councils, not necessarily friendly to the tourism industry, saying, right, no, that's it, we don't want any freedom camping, they can go to the camping grounds. The problem is we have some wonderful camping grounds, and I encourage people to go to them, but actually what we're selling as New Zealand, as the experience, as this amazing opportunity for tourists from wherever around the world to come, enjoy our company at our culture and our country at their leisure and at their pace. We're going to chop that. And I have to say that as former Minister of Tourism, I find that rather sad. I find the whole thing rather unnecessary. And I cannot understand how the National Party and the ACT Party, given their ranting and raving on things like nanny state and compliance and cost and all of that, can possibly put forward a piece of legislation like this. There are better ways of dealing with this. There are far better ways of dealing with this, and I hope that the National Party should see its way clear to at least, if it wants to push through this legislation, to at least amend it through the wise SOP put up by my colleague, to make judgment on the effects on the environment, not on the proposal to either camp or stay overnight in a place. As our good friend from Copperfields, Robin, says, that is what is the fun of New Zealand, being able to go somewhere and camp.
Camp Cooler understands that.
Most of them understand it, I think. but they're just too scared to, because in fact a cheap, shallow piece of legislation has been railed through Cabinet by Nick Smith.